A man's life was slipping away right before everyone's eyes. The people who rushed to help were women, among them a trained nurse. But in that very moment, what echoed across the venue wasn't gratitude, it was an announcement. Women, please step down from the ring. This is a true story from a regional sumo tour, Japan's national sport. It was the moment when the most universal kind of rightness, saving a human life, collided head-on with an absurd rule called tradition. Major international outlets, including the New York Times and the Washington Post, reported it as a story symbolizing gender discrimination in Japan. And looking only at what happened that day, that read makes sense. But what's interesting is the reaction inside Japan. The women who saved the mayor's life never blamed the referee who tried to stop them. Even the mayor himself, after he recovered, said this: "I cannot blame him." Why? I'm Yoppy. Today, I want to talk about what the referee, who appeared to choose tradition over a human life, was actually trying to protect. And I want to talk about something the people of this country, Japan, feel deep down. Invisible, but very real. This is Yoppy's perspective. April 4th, 2018, Maizuru City, in Kyoto Prefecture, a regional sumo tour was being held, an exhibition where wrestlers travel across the country performing for local audiences. Between matches, the mayor of Maizuru stepped onto the ring to give a speech. About a minute in, he suddenly fell backwards. He lost consciousness. It was a subarachnoid hemorrhage. While the men on the ring stood frozen, unsure of what to do, several women rushed up from the audience. Some of them were trained nurses, and they began performing chest compressions on the mayor. Here's something worth noting. Before climbing onto the ring, these women actually paused to ask, "Is it okay if we go up?" They vaguely knew there were restrictions on women entering the ring, but they didn't know exactly what those restrictions were. It was the kind of fuzzy awareness that's very Japanese. But then, the voice of a young referee standing below the ring began to repeat through the speakers again and again, "Women, please step down from the ring." In the chaos of the moment, paramedics finally arrived. The women handed off the resuscitation and stepped down. The mayor was rushed to the hospital and his life was saved. But those few seconds, that moment, would spark a debate across Japan and around the world. Now, the natural response to this is, I can't believe they prioritized tradition over a human life. I felt the same way, but there's another layer to this story. The women who saved the mayor's life refused every interview after the incident. The only thing they said was, "Please leave us alone." Not a single word of blame for the referee. The mayor himself, in his press conference after returning to office, said, "He was raised inside that tradition. There was no malice in him. I cannot blame him." There were of course voices in Japan criticizing the referee, but there were just as many voices defending him. Why? Because what the referee was trying to protect was something that doesn't fit neatly inside the simple frame of gender discrimination. It was something else. To understand what, we need to first understand what the dohyo, the sumo ring, actually means to Japanese people. Have you ever watched a Japanese player at an international soccer match bow to the field before stepping onto it? That isn't just sportsmanship. It's an expression of something distinctly Japanese. The sense that the very ground you play on is sacred and worthy of gratitude. And nowhere is this feeling stronger than the dohyo. The dohyo isn't just a circle. Originally, it was a temporary altar, a sacred space built to invite the gods and offer sumo as a ritual to them. The salt the wrestlers throw, the stomping of their feet, these aren't theatrical flourishes. They are parts of a religious ceremony, the same kind of gesture as clapping your hands at a Shinto shrine. And in this sacred space, there has long existed a custom called Nyonin Kinsei, a prohibition against women entering. The roots of this rule go back roughly 1,000 years. In Shinto, the blood of childbirth and menstruation was considered kegare, a state of being outside the ordinary, set apart. In Buddhism, women were sometimes seen as obstacles to spiritual training. These two ideas merged, and the practice of keeping women away from sacred grounds spread across the country. It isn't only the dohyo. To this day, there are mountains and islands in Japan that women are still forbidden to enter. A small but important note here. The word kegare doesn't mean that women themselves are dirty. It refers to states outside the everyday. Death, illness, childbirth, menstruation. It's a religious concept, not a moral one. After the incident, the chairman of the Sumo Association explicitly clarified that the modern rule isn't based on the old impurity interpretation. The ring, he said, is simply a sacred battleground for the wrestlers. That is the reason given today. Even so, over 1,000 years, layers of meaning piled on top of each other. The sense of kegare, the reverence for the sacred, the bonds of community, all of them merged together to shape the custom of Nyonin Kinsei. And on that spring day, in 2018, when a young referee opened his mouth and made that announcement, what came out carried the weight of all those 1,000 years. What he was trying to protect was tradition itself. But whether that tradition was even truly present on that ring in that moment, well, that turned out to be a more complicated question. After the incident, media outlets around the world reported on what happened. The New York Times ran the headline, "Women barred from sumo ring, even to save a man's life." Other major outlets framed it the same way, as a story about gender discrimination in Japan. If you only look at what happened that day, this read is natural. And inside Japan, social media was filled with the same kind of anger. Is this Japan's national sport, prioritizing discrimination over saving a life? When one human being saves another, tradition has nothing to do with it. But what's fascinating is that the response inside Japan wasn't only that. In an earlier 3-year study, Tokai University surveyed sumo audiences. Every year, more than 60% of respondents said they did not oppose the prohibition of women on the dohyo, and many of those respondents were women. At this point, a thought probably crosses the mind of a Western viewer. They just don't realize they're being oppressed. Wait a moment. What these women are responding to isn't a rule about gender. It's a sense about a place. Think about it this way. Your culture has its own invisible sacred spaces. If someone burst into a wedding ceremony shouting, or stepped onto the stage of a memorial service uninvited, or screamed inside the sanctuary of a cathedral, what you'd feel wouldn't be anger about a rule being broken. It would be something deeper, the sense that something sacred had been violated. What Japanese people feel about this issue is close to that. Most Japanese people will tell you they have no religion, but that doesn't mean they don't believe in anything. It just means that what they believe in is so deeply woven into daily life that it's no longer recognized as religion at all. But whether that sense should take priority over a human life that's slipping away in front of you, that's a completely different question. Now, there's one fact that makes this story even more complicated. That ring in Maizuru, it wasn't even subject to the Nyonin Kinsei rule. According to cultural anthropologists, the bans on women apply to the official tournament arenas, where ceremonies are performed to invite the gods. But the dohyo at regional tours, the kind being held in Maizuru that day, carry no religious prohibition at all. In other words, that young referee, caught in the chaos of the moment, working from a fuzzy understanding of the rules, was desperately trying to enforce a rule that didn't even apply. So if it wasn't really a rule he was protecting, what was he protecting in that split second? The answer, looking back, is an ironic one. He himself was trying to protect 1,000 years of tradition. That was, without a doubt, the most important thing in his world. But what was actually swirling around the ring in that moment wasn't a 1,000-year tradition. It was something closer, something more powerful, something far more immediate. Kuki, the unspoken atmosphere of the room. According to reports from that day, the moment the women stepped onto the ring, a murmur rose from the audience. It was a murmur of concern. Is the mayor okay? But it was also a murmur of unease. Is it okay for women to be on the sacred ring? These two completely different questions, asking essentially the same words, merged into one and swirled through the venue. The young referee, feeling the extreme tension, the confusion, the complex reaction of the crowd, half in panic, made his announcement. Later, the chairman of the Sumo Association acknowledged the institutional failure. It was the young referee who made the inappropriate announcement. The fact that he couldn't respond properly in a life-threatening situation, that's because the leadership, including myself, hadn't trained him well enough. Tradition and kuki are similar, but they are not the same. Tradition is something built over centuries, refined and given meaning by generations of people who thought carefully about why it mattered. Kuki is something fleeting, a mixture of emotion, unconscious anxiety, and reflexive reaction in the people around you in a single moment. In that moment on the dojo, it wasn't 1,000 years of tradition that overrode a human life. It was the kuki of that room, borrowing through the mouth of a young referee, the heavy and dignified language of tradition. That's what I think happened. And in Japanese society, kuki is something that at times binds people more powerfully than any law or written rule. Now, just for a moment, try to imagine yourself in that young referee's place. What would you have done? From the outside, it's easy to say, human life comes first. But for him, in that moment, the situation wasn't simple. The weight of a tradition that ancestors had protected for centuries, pressing down on his shoulders, the crushing responsibility that he might be the one to break it, the bewildered eyes of the audience murmuring, "There are women on the ring." A life or death emergency unfolding right in front of him. A situation changing by the second. Under that kind of pressure, how many people could stay calm? I might be the one who ends a tradition that has lasted hundreds of years, right here, right now. In that fear, under those eyes, he reached for the rule that had been drilled into him for years. In that moment, for him, it was the right thing to do. I'm not saying he was right. There is no tradition that should take priority over a human life. The mayor said as much himself. But to write him off as a villain, to leave it at that, I just don't think we can. Let's go back to what the people involved actually said. The mayor, after returning to his duties, said this in his press conference. "There is no man or woman in saving a life. The principle is that you go and help. I'm grateful for the women's swift response. An unwavering position. Human life comes first." But in the same press conference, when asked about the referee, he continued, "He was raised inside that tradition. There was no malice in him. I cannot blame him." And the women who saved his life? The Sumo Association offered to present them with certificates of appreciation. They declined. As the media swarmed for interviews, the only thing they said was this: "Please leave us alone." Not a single word of blame for the referee came from them. The people at the very center of this incident, the women who saved a life, and the man whose life was saved, every single one of them refused to blame the referee. That fact, quietly, says something about this country. Let me share something personal before we end. I'm a woman, and if someone in my own family were to collapse on a dojo, of course, I would run up to help. Life is more important than tradition, that's certain. But if I'm being completely honest, I think I would hesitate just for a split second, right at the bottom of those steps, even with my family's life slipping away in front of me. It isn't a rational reaction. Logically, there's no room for hesitation. But after a lifetime in this country, my body, at the edge of that ring, would probably freeze. Just for a second. That single moment of hesitation. Maybe that's what it means to be Japanese, to live carrying tradition on your back. And once I admit that hesitation exists inside me, I find that I can't simply blame that young referee. What was inside him isn't something special. It's inside me too, and probably inside many Japanese people. The women tried to save a life. The referee tried to protect tradition. And probably inside the women, inside the referee, and inside me, both of those instincts existed at the same time. It's in that complexity, I think, that you find the real face of Japanese people, living in the space between tradition and modern life. After the incident, the Sumo Association said they needed time. They would conduct surveys, gather outside opinions, and consider the future of Nyonin Kinsei. Years have passed since then. The rule itself hasn't changed. There's meaning in protecting tradition, and there's meaning in re-examining it. For myself, I believe tradition should be preserved. The reverence for sacred spaces, the sense of things unseen, these are what continue to make this country what it is. The weight that people carry when they live with something 1,000 years old on their shoulders, those of us who have never carried it may not be able to fully understand. But still, the question remains, a life and 1,000-year tradition. When those two collided in the span of a few seconds, which one do we choose? What do you think? That's everything for today's video. The reason I keep telling stories about Japan is because I love this country. Not just the beauty of the cherry blossoms and the traditions, but also the values and currents that flow underneath. If you want to understand the real Japan that doesn't make it into the guidebooks, the heart behind the headlines, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.